We are continuing our journey into the book of Revelation. Last week we discussed the various theories or theologies about the second coming of Christ, and I had the opportunity to speak to some of you and hear your thoughts about the second coming. For a lot of us who are reading the book of Revelation, it seems scary. The book has a lot of images that makes us wonder how the end times would look like and what it would be for us if we had to encounter them. Christian faith is put on trial and we are called to make choices. How will we live in the face of these trials and tribulations is a question that we struggle with as we read the book of Revelation. But it is my hope that you're able to see, view, and read these passages from the book of Revelation with hope and not be horrified by these images that are found. Yet, even as I say it, what was read to us this morning gives us chills. This is a scene that John, the author, saw. He saw this vision, and he's sharing that vision about a dragon. This is what we read. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on his horns, and each one head had a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had the feet of those of a bear, a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. Here this morning, I want to remind us that John again is using the word like a lot when he's talking about the vision that he is seeing. It was like a leopard, the feet like those of a bear, the mouth like a lion. Again, the word like is really, really important for us to hang on to, because this is not exactly what John is seeing, but this is the best description he can give to what he is seeing, what he is witnessing. The beast was hurt on its head, but now it's healed for some reason, and now it is using all its power to wage a war against God. And the beast spoke of blasphemous things against God and the work of Christ. And the people are now worshiping the beast, wondering if anyone can fight against the beast. The work of the beast, again, is to work against the people of God, against the throne of God. Last week I shared a vision that John saw where people from every tribe, tongue, and nation were gathered before the presence of God and they were worshiping. But now in Revelation 13:7, it is a different image. We read, it was given power to wage war against God's holy people. And to conquer them, it was given authority over every tribe and people, language and nation. And all the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life. Then John saw a second beast. A second beast had more authority than the first. And the second beast rose from the land. And the first beast and the second beast were working in tandem together. And again, they only had one agenda item. They wanted to work against the church of Christ. We read in verse 16, it also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive the mark on their right hands and their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had that mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for its number is of a man. That is, the number is 666. The mark of the beast, 666, where each person is given this mark, the mark of the beast. And the beast here is identified as the Antichrist. This morning's scripture speaks about the work of the Antichrist. And this morning, friends, I want to do 3 things for us this morning. I want to share with you three things I want to do. First is I want to share with you as to how Antichrist was seen through the lens of church history, how different people have looked at Revelations chapter 13 and interpreted the events that were taking place and said this might be the Antichrist. Second, I want to speak to you about who the Antichrist might be and what he might look like based on some of the scriptural things that are shared with us. And finally, I want to give us a word of hope for all who are terrified and anxious when you read the book of Revelations and wonder, what is this all about? Is there any hope for me, or should I be scared out of my mind? When I was and I want to say middle school or early high school, I went to a church camp, and they had one of the things that they shared with us was Revelations, and I was terrified. I was terrified because I was like, I was just absolutely terrified from reading these stories and wondering what it might be for me. So that happened to me, and I want to give a word of hope if you are feeling the same way as well. First, the historical interpretation. What I mean by the historical interpretation is I want us to walk us through different periods of time where the church that was facing some really big, massive challenges looked at the events that are taking place and said, this could be the Antichrist and the second coming of Christ might happen. So the first time the church ever did that was during the reign of a Roman emperor named Nero. Nero is known to be a brutal man. He was a violent human being, and he ruled during the life of the early church. It was said that Nero actually killed his own mother. He was someone who did not have moral compass, and he was willing to persecute Christians at any given time. It was said that once Nero tied up Christians and burned them at the stake so that the pathway to his palace could be lit by burning of all these Christians. He was just that brutal human being who blamed Christians for the fire that took place in Rome. And then he not only blamed the Christians for the disaster that Rome experienced, he then persecuted the Christians for that. Many scholars believe that the number 666 or 666 represents Nero. So this morning, I want us to do something with us. So I want you to participate with me. I want you to pull out the Bible that is below your desk. It says Holy Bible. It's blue. Thank you. Someone caught that. Thank you, Donna. All right. I want you to turn to Psalm 119 or page 607. All right. If you're there, you can just kind of put your head up and say hello or something, and I can go from there. All right. Is everybody there? All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. All right. It's really important that you're kind of seeing this page. All right. We're good? All right. So in the Hebrew language, there are no numbers. There are always alphabets. And so what they did was they converted their alphabet into a number. So right under Psalm 119, you'll see a little squiggly line thingy that says Aleph. Can you all see that? Right? And then after verse 8, you see Beth. It's not Elizabeth, it's actually Beth. And then right before 17, you see Gimel. And then right after 24, you see Dalet. Yes? Make sense? All right. So the way the Hebrew language and numbers worked, Aleph was 1, Beth would be 2, 3 would be Gimel, 4 would be Dalet, right? And then if you turn the page, there's the whole chapter is broken up into different sections, and each of that section is a different number. So what biblical scholars have said is, if you convert these numbers into letters, it would spell Nero Caesar. Make sense? Right? So it's not necessarily 666 as you see in movies and things like that are imprinted on your hands or on your foreheads, but some scholars have kind of said that it actually spells Nero, Caesar, in Hebrew, and those numbers would be 666. 666. Make sense? All right, if you have questions, please come and talk to me later, right? So Nero would have been seen as the Antichrist in the early church. And they would have expected Jesus to come a second time and defeat Nero and take the Church of Christ back into his kingdom and all that. But that didn't happen. The Church of Christ somehow continues on. And then during the Reformation time is a man named Martin Luther in 1600s and 1540, if I remember correctly, he spoke against the Catholic Church. He spoke against the Catholic Church. There were a lot of things that that the Catholic Church was doing. One of the biggest things that Martin Luther spoke against was against penance and how confessions were being used to exploit the poor and enrich the Catholic Church and the priests. And so Martin Luther spoke against the Catholic Church. When he spoke against the Catholic Church, the priests got very upset by that. And then later, those who agreed with Martin Luther started to speak against the priests in their own parishes. And this led to a period in church history called the Reformation. And as a result of the Reformation, there were a lot of changes that actually took place in the Catholic Church as well, but also a lot of the Protestant denominations were given birth, and the United Methodist Church is one of them, along with Presbyterians and various other denominations. But during that period, it's called the Reformation period in the life of the church, where reformers were speaking against the priests, and in turn were speaking against the Pope, because the Pope was complicit in this as well. So the reformers began to identify at that time that the Pope was the Antichrist. He said they called the Pope the man of sin that is found in the book of Thessalonians, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about that. And the reason they said that the Pope was the man of sin and was the Antichrist is because Pope began to order all the reformers to be killed and persecuted. So if you spoke against the church, you had the Romans killing Christians, but now Christians were killing other Christians. They were killing the reformers, and the Pope was at the center of this. And this was the first time in history when violence was used by Christians against Christians. And that was a pretty daunting time in the life of our church as well. Anyone who spoke against the Pope or the Catholic Church at that time was excommunicated from the Christian community and was not taken care of. And Pope, during that time, was seen in that light as well. So again, some Christians hoped that the second coming of Christ would happen in that moment, and it didn't. The other one that surprised me in my research as I was thinking about who certain historical figures would have been identified as the Antichrist, what surprised me was Napoleon was identified as the Antichrist by the church. And the reason he was identified as the Antichrist is because Napoleon wanted to attain power. He wanted to rule all of Europe. He wanted his conquests to be known by everyone. And when he was conquering these European nations, and he was absolutely brutal in terms of the way he expanded his kingdom. And he didn't do this as other emperors did in the name of the church. He did it by himself. And he did not allow the church to have a significant influence in his own reign. And some argue that Napoleon could have been the one who actually laid the groundwork for Europe to be a secular state. Napoleon was someone who sought his own glory and promoted himself above anything else. Lack of religion and a need for his own glory, some during that time identified him as the Antichrist. The next historical figure would not surprise anyone who's sitting here. It was Hitler. The crimes that he committed and the genocide that he committed are well too known for all of us. And he led a campaign that was anti-Jewish. And in its path, he did not spare any Christians as well. He was truly evil in the way he carried out his vision for what he saw the new reality would be. And anyone who came in his way would have been, his or her life was taken. The other person who was seen as the Antichrist was Stalin, Joseph Stalin, who was an atheist and wanted to promote a non-religious way of life. He killed several clergy. He persecuted clergy, and he was instrumental in closing thousands of churches in Russia. I was speaking to someone who is from a Russian Orthodox background, and they said that they heard stories from their grandmother that she never worshiped in a church all her life growing up because she was afraid that if she entered a place of worship, that her life and our family's life would be in danger. So the work that Stalin did in that time frame, some of the Christians who were living under his tyranny saw him as the Antichrist under his reign. So the church over the years has interpreted different people to be the Antichrist. Nero for his brutality, his violence. Napoleon for his own self-edification and glory. Stalin, who was an atheist. Hitler, who killed people. Every time church faced a challenge, they saw them as the Antichrist. That is the historical way of looking at it. And then there are other theories that are out there. One comedic thing that I saw, and I don't agree with this, please, I just want you to know this. Someone said Ronald Reagan was Antichrist, and because Reagan has 6 letters. Can you count it? Right? And his middle name was Wilson, W-I-L-S-O-N, 6, right? And Ronald has how many letters? 6 letters, 666. So anyway, right, there's this thing that happens all the time that they kind of keep feeding into it, right? So the second thing that I want to talk about today is look at some of these passages in the New Testament and the Old Testament about the Antichrist. The word Antichrist actually doesn't appear in the book of Revelation. It actually appears in the letters of John. Traditionally, we have said that the person who wrote the Gospel of John, the letters of John, and the book of Revelation is the same person. So it appears in the letters of John, the word Antichrist. When we read the Old Testament, there are several people who kind of rise to power who work against the work of God's people. And especially this is found when you read the book of Daniel. There, in the book of Daniel, there's a lot of images very similar to the book of Revelation, where someone comes to power and their sole purpose of coming to power was to destroy the people of God. And this morning we saw a similar reading of Revelation 13. The other passage that comes to us when we think about the Antichrist is Mark chapter 13. Reading from verse 5. And Jesus began to say to them, "See that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he.' And they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars, rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place. The end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, and there will be famines. Here, Jesus, speaking to his disciples, uses the word I am he. In Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke, it's called Anihu, which refers to the I am sayings that are found in the Gospel of John, where Jesus identifies himself as Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament. So what Jesus is saying here is, many will come in my name saying, I am Yahweh. I am the God of the Old Testament, but do not be deceived when you hear these passages, when you hear these individuals proclaiming that they are Christ. Then again in Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 10, remember I said this, the Pope was referred to this person. This is what we read. The coming of the lawless one is by the captivity of Satan with all power and false signs and wonders, and with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love truth and to be saved. Again, Jesus here is saying that he is going to conquer the lawless man, and the lawless man here is the Antichrist. Finally, reading from Revelation chapter 20, verse 7 through 10, this is what we read. And when the 10,000 years have ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea, and they marched up over the broad plain of the earth, surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them. The devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophets were. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Here is what is going to happen to the Antichrist. When we read stories about the Antichrist, when we read stories from the book of Revelation and various other passages like Mark 13 and 2 Thessalonians 2, Revelation 13 and 20 and various other places, one of the things that we worry as those who are reading these scriptures is, are we going to be deceived? Are we going to stand the test of time? Right? That was my worry when I heard about the book of Revelation at that summer camp. I was terrified. Will I stand? What will happen to me? Again, in Revelation 13, what was said to us this morning, right? There's a sense of deception that's going to take place. This morning, I want to share with you a word of hope. For when you feel terrified or anxious that you yourself might be deceived and led astray by the work of the Antichrist. I cling to these words when I feel terrified by the work of Satan in this world. When I think about all that is affecting my own life, when I am anxious, when I get worried, I cling to this promise. I hope you can write these words down. I hope you can write this reference down and memorize it to your soul so that you can say these words in times of trouble. Reading from Romans 8:31 and 37. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Knowing all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels or rulers, nor things present or things to come, nor powers, nor height or depth, or anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God and Jesus Christ our Lord. Friends, hear the good news. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. Nothing, neither height, nor depth, nor angels, nor demons, nothing can separate us from the love of God. This is the truth that we hang on to. When our hearts get anxious, we cling to this promise that nothing, I mean, nothing will separate us from the love of God. If you're thinking, all right, Pastor, what if I get deceived? How do I know that I have the strength to face the deceptions of the Antichrist? Will I be led astray? I don't want you to be worried about that either, because it is really, really simple. It is really simple. This is something that you've heard me say before. As it relates to our faith, we've kind of clung to this word as our statement of purpose here as a church. It is love God, love others, serve. Jesus said this is the greatest commandment, to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Meaning that Jesus is our number one priority in our life. It is not money, it is not possessions, it is not a position in this world, it is not the wealth, it is nothing. The one way to look at it is to say, God, if I lose all this, I will still love you because you are my God. Making God our utmost priority. The second is to love our neighbor as ourselves, meaning we don't see others with prejudice, but rather we see each other that we are all created in God's image. That when we begin to live into this reality that Jesus taught us, friends, our faith is solid. And one of the things that we are called to do when we read the Gospels, Jesus over and over again, when you read the parables, the miracles he did, and how he lived his life, one of the things Jesus teaches us constantly is to care for the poor, to care for those who are in need, to love God, to love others, and serve. You won't be deceived if you're doing those three things. That's it. It is that simple. You will not lose your faith if you cling to these things, to love God, to love your neighbor, and to serve. Let us pray. A God who calls us to love you, a God who calls us to love our neighbor, a God who calls us to care for those who are in need. God, help us to live into these realities of your truth in all that we do. Amen.